thanks to Sambodhi, ISRN, and University of Washington for taking this initiative. Uh, so one of the key issues that I want to begin with is exactly what is it that we are dealing with right now. Because there's a lot of focus on the impact on GDP, impact on livelihoods, impact on income, etc. But it's also important to recognize what is it that exactly is the nature of the problem. So the slide that you shared was estimates that were during the World Economic Outlook, when IMF came out with it, and a lot has changed since then because just yesterday World Bank came and said that this is going to be the worst global recession compared to the World War II, and I think within the last month, a lot of unknowns have become known, but there is still a lot of uncertainty regarding what is likely to follow. And what happens in such an uncertain period is it is very difficult to accurately predict what is going on. Uh, so the best that we can do is to sort of put in place an analytical framework to understand what exactly is happening. Now, this pandemic has two dimensions to it. One is the public health dimension, and the other is, of course, the economic dimension to it. I would actually like to share my screen to give a sense of idea, of exactly what is it that represents this trade-off. So this is basically a scatter plot that shows number of government social distancing measures and the number of cases. And what this makes very clear is that the more social distancing measures that have been taken by countries, the number of cases on an average has been lower, which means that, of course, social distancing has worked. And what it also means is that when you impose social distancing measures, such as not allowing more than, say, 10 people to be in a crowded space, etc., it has an impact on contact services. And contact services basically means your restaurant, hospitality, and industries such as that. uh, so of course, this pandemic is going to have a disproportionate effect on certain sectors of the global economy, such as aviation, as we are now seeing, whereas relatively safer sectors could be agriculture, etc. And that is true even for India, because we see that agricultural sector has not been very adversely affected. So this trade-off is something that we need to keep in mind, that if you want to save lives, then we need to put in place social distancing measures, and they obviously come with a certain degree of cost. Now the next thing that I want to talk about is China, because this entire crisis originated from Wuhan, and China was one of the first countries to go for a lockdown, and obviously it sort of did face certain costs associated to it. So when we look at China, we see a very swift V-shaped recovery in economic activity, which is very encouraging because a lot of the focus that all of us have had over the last couple of months is to basically put exactly the growth trajectory. That what is going to happen once the lockdown is lifted across countries, what is going to happen when the fear of the pandemic is going to subside, because we don't see a vaccine coming in till sometime next year, and that means that this virus is something that we have to stay with for a while longer, and we obviously cannot keep our economy shut. So this graph basically presents exactly what kind of recovery we are looking at. It is going to be a very swift recovery, and this data is also sort of corroborated by the China PMI numbers and US initial claims data, which basically represents the joblessness. A key point about this statistic is that in history of this data set, US never experienced such a sharp increase ever as it did in the pandemic, and that represents the scale of the economic disruption that this has caused. And now that the situation is also drastically improving, it again signals a very swift recovery. But this scale of disruption is important for emerging market economies such as India, Brazil, Argentina, and of course, even some Asian and African economies. One of the key things that we need to recognize is that the world is not fair, and the way the economic system is, obviously, so there are certain privileges that the early industrialized countries have that are not available to the global south. Say for instance, countries like US, UK have gone ahead and given record high stimulus packages to absorb any form of economic shock from their companies. Now that's a privilege that economies like say Argentina, etc., cannot afford, because the moment they start doing that, there are concerns, and I'll come into those concerns in a bit. because they're very relevant for countries like India and certain African countries as well. So that differentiating factor is something that we need to keep in mind. But before that, I want to talk about lockdown, because there's this entire debate happening that, and this is very true for the Indian context, where people are saying that there's no demand, and that you need to give a demand-driven stimulus, you need to do cash transfers, etc. Some of which government has already done as a part of the 20 trillion package. But this is what I want to discuss. Lockdown means that there is no economic activity happening, and that essentially means that there is no market operating. And when there's no market, you don't know whether there's demand or supply. So we cannot make any prediction about whether there's demand which is missing or not, unless and until obviously we lift the lockdown. And of course, lifting the lockdown means taking a risk in terms of increased cases. So that's the trade-off that government face. But of course, every day of lockdown has a cost associated with it, and we should be well aware of these facts, because at some point people are going to ask that why is it that your economy hasn't done well, or why is it that your GDP has contracted, because as of today India is also likely to register negative growth. And of course we'll register negative growth, but it won't be as bad as some of the other countries, so we'll still be relatively much better off. But the reason why we'll get a negative growth is because now it's been over a particular, over an entire financial quarter where there hasn't been economic activity in nearly 60% of your economy. And when that happens, you obviously cannot expect any form of growth to happen. So that's something that we do need to keep in mind. So I'll just stop the share over here, and I'll now have a more nuanced discussion regarding the nature of the problem. Uh, you see, when the pandemic comes in, there's a lot of uncertainty, and when there's a lockdown, what happens is that companies continue to face fixed costs, and these fixed costs come in the form of rent, wages, etc. Now, in the event of a lockdown, company does not undertake any economic activity, so there's no revenue coming in, but there's a cash outflow going on. And this is a cash flow problem. This is primarily a cash flow problem that companies are facing across the world. And this is not just in the context of lockdowns. Economies in Africa, etc., where there hasn't been a lockdown, they're also facing this problem because of uncertainty and supply chains being disrupted. Mind you, a lot of the supply chains go back to China, and China is the de facto manufacturing place of the world. So when China was in a lockdown, the global supply chains kind of broke down, and companies had no idea of how to repair them immediately, because there were no alternatives readily available. So all of those factors have put in place a significant cost on companies across the world. And some of the economies have tried to absorb this problem. For instance, if we talk about India, India announced a stimulus package which had tax deferrals, easy credit to MSMEs, and at the same time, it also looked at equity infusion in companies. Now, this was done to ensure that companies are able to get enough cash into themselves so that they can sustain their operations. And once the economy is back on track, they can, make use of this opportunity which has presented itself to India. Uh, and I think a lot of countries are trying to do that, and that's good, because it will ensure that a major part of the crisis can be addressed upfront, and that the costs are limited onto the companies. But of course, for countries such as Argentina, this is not possible, because they have a significant debt problem. They can't. I mean, Argentina has been running a deficit. They have a lot of debt which is owed to foreign players, and they want their money back, and they're unable to arrive at a sort of conclusive solution to the problem. So this entire pandemic, which results in lower economic activity and stress on the corporate sector, or companies, this can spill over to the financial sector, and in certain places it has. And once it spreads in the financial system, it becomes a contagion, because once there are bankruptcies, you see a lot of financial system stress which keeps coming up. India is well aware of these stresses, because we have been facing a financial crisis in the form of NPAs since 2012, 2013. So the entire financial system will at some point take this stress on, and this will create a major problem for economies in Southeast Asia and in Africa, because you'll see currency movements happening. We have already seen the dollar becoming a much more stronger currency, relatively appreciating, and that has happened because whenever there's a crisis, people generally tend to move towards safer assets, and that is dollar. So there's shortage of dollar in the international market, which is affecting emerging market economies and making them more vulnerable. And at the same time, the development finance which was available in the form of sovereign funds, etc., for investment in a lot of these countries, such as South African or even India. Now that capital is not going to be available, which means that the cost of capital is going to go up. So while of course there are multilateral agencies that will provide aid, such as World Bank, which has already provided aid, and IMF, which has also sanctioned a lot of money to low income countries. But the fact is that private investment in these areas will be hit severely, and this means that for the next 6 to 8 months we are looking at low levels of capital inflows in emerging market economies. India so far has tried to avoid that trend, and a major reason is that because it included economic reforms as a part of its stimulus package, which no other country has, and those reforms gave the confidence to foreign investors to put in their money in these uncertain times, and that is why we've witnessed a relatively comfortable position. But for other countries, countries such as say Vietnam or Bangladesh or Cambodia, that will be very difficult. And with this large pool of global capital lying with so much of liquidity lying around the global financial system, and it not being available to these countries, this will definitely dampen the process of their growth. And a major blow would be that we will see a sharp increase in global poverty levels for the next couple of months, after which situation will normalize, and of course we'll be back to the pre-COVID situation. So the next 6 months are obviously going to be very difficult for a lot of these economies, uh, and there will be a lot of volatility. Uh, but the key concern that I have at this moment is to do with protectionism, which has resurfaced because every country wants to protect its own interests, specifically with respect to China. We see countries try to move their supply chains away from there, and companies are also eager to not rely on them too much, because they've realized that when you rely or when you over depend on a particular country, it brings in a different kind of risk to your supply chain. Uh, so that's also happening. Now the problem is that in the event that we do turn towards protectionism, and if there are tariffs which are raised across all countries, which means that you do not isolate particular countries, but you raise tariffs across the board, what is going to happen is that some of these lesser developed economies will be the most worst hit, because they won't have capital inflows to the extent that they were having before, and on the other hand, the opportunities for trade are going to contract. uh, and as much as people talk about rising inequality, etc., fact is that globalization caused the largest point to point decrease in global poverty levels, and the largest reduction in regional disparity in terms of inequality. So to do a reversal of that would probably deny some of the lesser developed economies with the opportunity that were provided to the East Asian tigers, and obviously those are concerns that I think the global South needs to address together collectively, because no country alone can possibly push for freer trade, at least within democratic rules based regime. So that's definitely something that we need to look forward to. uh, but broadly, I think that the concerns that this is going to be a major economic slump uh, is only partly true. Of course, the global economy is going to contract this financial year, but we need to also keep in mind that for 2 3 months, the supply was disrupted and the entire global economy was shut. If you ignore that 3 months of phase, then you see a very sharp normalization of economic activity, which happens over the next 6 to 8 months. Which kind of gives confidence that the next financial year would be more like business as normal approach than what is being predicted as of now. A key difference is between the crisis that we saw post World War or the Great Depression is that those recessions were a lot deeper and they lasted a lot longer. The difference is that this one is far more deeper, in the sense that of the crisis is much more swift. It will spread across the financial system and it will have a lot of volatility, but the duration of it is very short, in the sense that within 6 to 8 months we will be out of it. And I think that's the blessing in disguise, and I think that's something that really makes us very optimistic. about global recovery. And one of the factors that makes us very optimistic also has to do with the way governments have responded. You see advanced economies give record stimulus, which is great. Then you see countries like Brazil, which have also given a fiscally prudent yet adequate stimulus. Amongst emerging market economies, India has given one of the biggest stimulus. I think the average is around 3%, and India has given around 6, so it's nearly double. And this 6 obviously does not include the monetary part of this 20 trillion stimulus. So I think what we are witnessing right now is a level of cooperation by policymakers across the world, especially economic policymakers, whether it's central banks, whether it's the finance ministers, who are hell bent on preserving the financial system and its stability. And the key advantage of this is that they will limit the extent of the economic damage that we will witness. And that is very important because this is a crisis that cannot be addressed, at least the economic crisis. In fact, even the health crisis cannot be addressed by a single country. It requires a collaborated, concentrated, and coordinated policy response to ensure that the financial flows continue to be as stable as possible, and currencies also continue to be as stable as possible. To a limited degree, I think central banks have been able to ensure that this happens, even though, as I said, that the dollar has appreciated, but that is a normal process that happens during every recession. So the key takeaway from this is that probably this time around the central banks have been more proactive in terms of preventing a crisis, and they have been more proactive compared to 2008, which is why we are witnessing that this economic stress has not spilled over to the financial system to the extent that it could have. Uh, and what really needs to be done, especially by economies in Southeast Asia, is to prevent bankruptcies as much as possible, to ensure that their companies can survive and that there is no long term impact of this pandemic. As long as we are able to do that, we should have a better next financial year. Obviously, IMF projects, based on their April numbers, that the next financial year would be a business as normal approach. Uh, and we do hope that that is the case. But a lot of it also depends on whether there is a second wave of this pandemic, or whether the virus mutates and comes back. So we don't really know exactly what is likely to happen on the health front. But what we do know is that at least on the economic front, we have started going back to the normal, and that normalization of economic activity is very important at this junction. And I think it's good that global economies are opening up. As long as we open up, but we remember that we don't have to close the doors that have allowed countries that were less developed to become developed. As long as those opportunities and those routes through trade are available, I see that COVID can cause a tectonic shift in the way supply chains are sort of built or created. And a lot of them would pass through countries like India, some South African countries, and middle basically South Asian countries such as Indonesia, Vietnam, etc. And that means that we will witness a more broad based manufacturing process, which will create a lot more opportunities in these regions. And this could be a sort of takeoff moment for a lot of these economies if they are able to get their policy mix right. I think with that, probably I would like to conclude with what I wanted to say on the present situation as it is.